Welcome to another edition of Ask Andrew. Each week I answer a film-related question submitted by one of you, our BMFI patrons. This week, Sam asks, what makes a film truly dated or not? Is it dramatic structure, dialogue, cinematic style, music? Do filmmakers these days consider somehow trying to future-proof their works, or is that simply too much for them to be thinking about? Well, this is a really interesting question, and I doubt there's any sort of single answer uh, to this question, though I think we can all agree we've all seen movies that have not aged well or seem particularly dated. I don't think filmmakers try to future-proof their works. I think most filmmakers, when they embark on a project they are excited about making, believe that it is good, of exceptional quality, and assume they will do a good job with it, and imagine that there's no reason it shouldn't stand the test of time. I think there might be some examples where filmmakers are self-aware enough to know that maybe the screenplay isn't that good, or the sort of um, effects required to tell the story, or the technology that's being relied on for the effects isn't quite where it should be. But by and large, I don't think filmmakers try to think about future proofing too much, if at all, because I don't know that they can do that. So many things only seem dated in most cases, or seem like they won't age well in retrospect. The one way I think filmmakers do think about this is they have become increasingly aware of the life their movies will have after theatrical release, and probably think about, in terms of framing and scale of shots and things like that, might think about their movies being watched on smaller screens more than perhaps they used to. In terms of a movie seeming dated, I think there are a few ways that this can occur. You mentioned music in your question, and that is a big one I hear from a lot of patrons. How movies from the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s have so much soundtrack music that the score is seen to be there not to augment what people are feeling or add to the experience, but to sort of try to dictate what people should feel, or to push them towards having a certain view of a moment in the movie, etc. So I think music is one way a movie can easily seem dated. I think in terms of dramatic structure, I don't necessarily think that in and of itself is a way a film can seem dated, although I will say that I think happy endings, or sort of very neat and convenient endings, can make a movie seem dated, and there's an extent to which I guess that is part of the structure. Dialogue can certainly seem dated and clunky and burdensome. I don't know if, I guess a movie could have enough such dialogue where the whole movie seems that way, but I think it's more likely in the case of dialogue that certain moments will seem sort of out of touch or out of step. I think a lot of it has to do with technique. I think a lot of it has to do with technology. I think a lot of it has to do with acting style, which is something else I hear from a lot of students about older films. I think pacing is one of it. I think movies tend to have more shots, which means shorter shots, which means a sort of faster pace now than they used to. And frankly, I think a lot of it has to do with the view of the world. There are a lot of different sorts of entities and kinds of people that have fallen out of favor now that used to be very highly regarded in the earlier decades of American filmmaking. Whether it was the government, think about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Would a movie like that be made today? Whether it is wealthy people used to be given much more of a fair shake in the movies than they tend to be today. It's rare that someone who's truly rich in a movie, if they're a character of any significance, it's rare that they're the good guy. They're far more often the villain, and other things as well. Obviously, in terms of representation of different groups, there are decades and decades of Hollywood films where You don't see any African Americans, for example, unless they are a cook or a housekeeper or work on a train or something like that. And that's obviously, not okay, and clearly a sign a movie is dated, as it should be. Gender roles in movies and the expectations of how certain characters will behave or what they will do can help a movie seem dated. So I think it very often has to do with content. I think it very often has to do with filmmaking technique and technology, things that have just advanced far beyond where they were in past decades. And it's hard for us to imagine that the movies today will ever seem dated in those two regards, but inevitably they probably will. I think, and would I be surprised if in, 70 years from now, a movie from this year seemed as dated then as a movie from 1944, let's say, seems today? I would be surprised, but, it very well could be the case. It will certainly seem dated in some way. Maybe not a very satisfying answer, but I hope I at least began to address the question you had in mind when you submitted it. And if you have a question related to film that you'd like me to try and answer, or I guess give an opinion on, please visit the Film Studies Online section of brynmarfilm.org and look for the Ask Andrew form. Who knows? Next time I might be answering one of your questions.